welcome to the Dangerous Faith podcast, and eventually when I get to it, the YouTube channel that we have here, and I'm honored to be able to welcome onto the podcast, John Hobbs. He is technically, what are we, John? Are we cousins-in-law?
Yeah, that's what I always say.
Okay, there we go. I guess cousins-in-law is how we are. And honored to have him onto the podcast and the YouTube channel. And so we're talking about house churches, home churches. I don't know if he has another term he likes to use, but I thought it was always fascinating. We'd get together at various times throughout the year, and I'd always love to hear just different things that is going on with his church. And so we'll get into all that. But before we do so, John, welcome to the podcast and YouTube channel. How are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. You?
I'm doing wonderfully. So for our listening, viewing audience, tell us a little bit about yourself, and I'll let you go into whatever level of detail you would like.
Yeah, sure. So, name's John. So I'm about in my mid-30s. So I've been a believer as long as I can remember. And just since we're talking about churches and stuff, a little bit of my church background is I grew up in the same church. It was a church my dad helped start back in 1988 or 1987, sometime way back then. Belonged to that church for the first 30 or so years of my life. It's a really great experience, especially when I was younger growing up. I mean, just everything that you'd hope from a church as far as just really tight-knit families. I mean, really having multiple just older folks that really, when you say they're like another father and mother, I mean, it's like, I was blessed. Lots of just excellent people to be around and friends that are more like brothers and sisters. So it was a very, very good experience growing up. Anyways, as I got older, things changed a little bit. I don't know how much of that was things changing or me changing, and time happens. But then, so around, I guess, 4 years ago, maybe a little bit more than 4 years ago, felt the Lord just calling, in various different ways, calling us to step out from where we were going, which was never a huge church anyways. I mean, always had a building and stuff like that, but maybe the biggest it ever got was 150 people, but usually probably more around the 100 mark. But then, I felt the Lord's call to move on. Wasn't sure exactly what that meant. Because technically small church, but it was not a home church. And, in fact, it was, I ended up on a beach trip with Valerius. And I was reading which is the only book of Francis Chan's I've ever read, but I was reading Letters to the Church or Letters to the Churches. And, it was very convicting. There was some of the stuff he was talking about in the book were just very personally convicting to me about my attitude had been kind of getting a little bit sour over the last couple of years of going to church, and just felt a lot of conviction that my attitude was not right. Cause I was like, well, why are things not changing here? Why are things not changing the way I think they should change? And really felt the Lord saying, it's like, look, this is my church. These are my people. You're not the leader here, and all these different things. It's like, let me worry about that. What it turned out is like, God was working on me, trying to lead me to change something. So, and that's when it was like, okay, well, it's time to step out in faith. And, and it just happened that I was, feeling very drawn to the home church idea, partly because of that book, but that was not the beginning of why I was thinking that way. And then that just coincided with, happenstance, COVID starting. So everybody had to do some sort of home church or virtual church. And, for different reasons. I think it's better to be in person. I think everybody would agree it's better to be in person if you can. And, then we went through COVID all together. We missed a few Sundays because literally everybody would maybe be sick with a lot of little kids and stuff. So you've always got stomach bugs and stuff going around. But for the most part, we didn't miss a beat. We broke all the COVID rules. I mean, we had, dozens of people in tiny rooms together singing and having meals together. So we broke a lot of rules. And I'm really grateful that we got to do that, so we didn't miss a beat. So I'll be curious when my kids are older, because when people are talking about COVID, they didn't have to experience a lot of what a lot of people experience. Because not only did we do house church or started doing that at the beginning of COVID, but we also homeschooled our kids already anyways. Mm-hmm. So in a lot of ways, their life was not, I don't even know if they would really understand what happened, because it was so just, it didn't affect them that much. And I think it showed a type of resilience to having that type of model of church and schooling as well. There's also challenges, but it's a very resilient way of doing things. But that's a little bit of where I'm coming from. I guess, I don't know if you're interested in like just theologically kind of the tradition I come from, but it's more of a, I guess, charismatic Pentecostal / Southern Baptist feel. So you're kind of in your vein of your standard non-denominational, but
would you call it Baptist-costal?
Yeah, ish. I mean, it's not like so unfamiliar. Like you could have somebody who's going to your standard kind of First Baptist church wherever you're from, and it wouldn't be so different. But you could also have somebody from like an Assemblies of God church. It wouldn't be so different that they wouldn't be necessarily uncomfortable. So it's kind of in that vein. So I don't know. You're typical small Southern non-denominational vein. You know, a lot of, like I said, a lot of Pentecostal influence as well. But
gotcha. Okay. Well, that helps us to know where you're coming from. And so John, what would you say at your home church? What would you say your current role is at the church?
So I'm an elder. So we have 3 elders currently, and we were so that took a long time. We weren't appointed for the first 2.5 or 3 years, and partly because we were still, you're still waiting to see what the Lord does. Actually, it was what was Watchman Nee. There's a story that he talks about where he was planting churches in China, and his method of appointing elders was he would go plant churches, then he would leave for like a year or two, and eventually he'd end up coming back around. And in that meantime, Lord willing, the leaders would arise, and he'd come back and be like, okay, obviously, like these people are the ones that the Lord has appointed as elders. So we took a while before we had officially appointed elders, and we don't have a supreme elder. We don't have like a pastor over the elders or a lead elder per se. So it is a equal, I guess, authority. And we've had about 2 years ago. So we outgrew the houses we meet in. So we had to do a church break. It is a breaking. People always want to use cute words like multiplying or planting, but it really hurts, So I kind of prefer the breaking terminology because that's the way it feels. But we had to break into 2s, so we have 2 churches now that we're still very close with. We do joint services every month, and they also had 3 elders appointed by their congregation. And as far as how we were appointed, it was the Lord just kind of, he kind of revealed who was going to be who was already leading anyways, but then the congregation affirmed that. And then we had a period of time where if anybody had any objections, they could bring it up. And so then that's how we got where we are now. I don't know if that's the way we would do it in the future, because I mean, it would certainly have to be with the assent of the congregation, I think. But since we were simply that we didn't have anybody who was officially planting us, we didn't have like a Watchman Nee, like laying hands on us. That was a tricky part. Not that we didn't have other elders from other fellowships that were assisting us, but we didn't have like an official like sending out from a particular fellowship.
Gotcha.
But anyway, this is an interesting dynamic. Just the different problems you face. That I mean, I don't know. It's relatively unique, I feel like, but we muddled our way through it, and Lord willing, we're doing the right thing.
So let's talk about that a little bit. Working your way through different issues that come up, and so we're gonna address some of the positives about this I guess, church model. I don't know if you like that terminology. You mentioned how sometimes you prefer the word church breaking or splitting. Splitting has a
Yeah.
bad connotation to it, but it's more honest and open. So
Yeah.
I know we get in the weeds about terminology, but your church model, the home church, talk about some of the advantages of it. Maybe scripturally, you think it's accurate to Acts. Maybe just practically, it is very advantageous for various reasons. Talk to me about some of the benefits of having a home church model.
Yeah. So like, since you mentioned Acts 2:42 is really the foundational verse for how we structure our services, and says, I'll read it. I got it open anyways. And they were continually devoting themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, the breaking of bread, and to prayer. So there's those four elements. And it says, I think it was right before that or right after it, it talks about how they're going from house to house. And so that's really like and not saying that that's the only way. Obviously, it's not the only way that worship should be, that Christians should join together for worship, but it's the most available way. It's, if you think about, Francis Chan actually uses this analogy in Letters to the Church. He talks about how, if you look at the largest hotel chains in year 2000, you've got like Hilton, you've got Holiday Inn, all these different brands. They could not house everybody in the world. But once you go to modern day Airbnb and things like that, suddenly every housing unit in the world is available to be used. So it's like you instantly have the capacity to handle everybody. Because like if they say, I don't know if the stat's still true, but it's true to a certain degree, that your church will typically only minister to fill up with the number of people that can actually physically be in the church. And typically people, once, I think it was like 75% or 80% capacity, that'll be seating capacity, is typically when a church will stop growing. For different reasons, like people are uncomfortable sitting right next to other people, for one thing. So it's like, even if you had like a church in, like Times Square, New York, and you have 2 services, 1,000 members, 1,000 seats, or 3 or 4 services, that's 4,000 people you might be ministering to on a Sunday. But there's 9 million people in New York City. So it's just small. But if it's like, okay, well, each of these apartment units is a potential house of worship where Christians can gather together, then all of a sudden capacity is not an issue at all. Resources are really not an issue at all. I'm already paying for my house. I don't have to have an extra fund to pay for my house. That money is already there. And so you have capacity to do it. And as we found out through COVID, you have freedom, a lot of freedom. I mean, if you look at the most closed societies in the world, the church is still there to some degree. It might have to be underground, but it's still there. So you don't have to limit yourself to just physical projects, building projects to meet as a church. Like it's a fine way to join together, and it's really convenient if it's, not in your house per se. Yeah. But that doesn't have to be the way you do it. And I feel like as Americans, it's a helpful lesson to learn. You don't have to, there's not just one way to meet together, because someday, as we learned during COVID, you might not be allowed to meet at your church building. And so to have that resiliency to be like, okay, well, we can still meet together. We can still be the church together, despite persecution, if that comes, despite regulations, if they come, despite distance, all these different things. So it's a really resilient model. And then also there's no overhead. It's like none of us are paid staff. So that's a benefit in a lot of ways, because we don't, it can remove a lot of potential conflicts of interest. It removes the whole money aspect. You don't have to wonder if somebody's in this just for the money, which is nice.
Money never causes problems, John. Remember that.
The love of money, though. The love of money. So so that's a good thing. It's like, it just, and again, it's like, don't muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. I have nothing against paying ministers, paying people that are doing the word of God, if that's what God has called them to and God is providing for them. But just like Paul said, I forget which passage he's talking about, how when I was with you, he was a tent maker. So he got a job mending tents, making tents. So just specifically so that nobody could accuse him of just grafting money from the people around him or being a grifter. So it's not that it's like something that you have to do, but it's something that prevents a lot of accusations. And it's just a lot. It's really simple. I mean, we don't have to, it's like you've already got your own house and life you have to run anyways. And then if you have a staff and a church building all this, that's just a whole nother ball of wax that you got to manage as well. So it's a lot simpler. And I think, generally speaking, the simplicity is a major benefit of a house church model. You could make it complicated if you wanted to. I would suggest not doing that. I honestly don't know why you want to, it's pretty simple when you think about what church is. It's like what we just read. They devoted themselves continually to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, breaking of bread, and to fellowship. You can do those things. Like, we can all, as Christians, do those things together. And it's just good. I mean, and it's in a little house, like when it's like, 30, I mean, we actually get up to about 50 or 60 people. But when it's that size group, you can still know everybody well. So when it says fellowship, it's not like I see people that I see, but they don't know me. Like when it's 30, 40 people inside your house, you know them to a pretty decent degree.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, everybody, every relationship can be better, but you know them somewhat. You miss them if they're not there. Like, you can tell, like, because visibly, the faces. And I think that's a benefit too, especially as an elder and in a pastoral role. It's less to take care of. Like, you can actually, like, you have to, like, if you're at a bigger church, you have to have a big team, because otherwise it's hard to even just keep track of everybody. So this kind of takes a lot of that out, just by making it simpler. It's an easier size to work with. There's a number of other things we can.
Yeah, that's a great answer. All these different advantages. And I like the way you phrase it. You're saying this isn't the only way to go about things. So you're not like dogmatic. It has to be done this way. But you do say, all right, I think this is very biblical. I think there are a lot of advantages of having a church structure like this. And so, John, I appreciate you outlining all these things for us. Now, we can keep on going with some of the positives, or we can jump over to maybe some objections people might have to the home church model. Where would you like to go?
We can jump over to the cons if you want.
Okay, so let's let's talk about some of those structural type of things. So, for example, you mentioned having 3 elders at your home church, and, Lord willing, you love one another, you serve one another. Christ-like servanthood is just permeating your house church, and, Lord willing, right? But let's just say there are some disagreements. Let's just say, for some reason, doctrinally or practically, the 3 of you just don't agree on certain matters for whatever reason. Denominationally, there tends to be a next group of people, like another body, council of whatever, different terminology for each denomination. But you would take a dispute, and then you would go up the chain and be like, hey, can y'all help us work out this dispute? If something like that were to arise in your home church, what would happen there? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So I can't say from experience as far as a big dispute, because we haven't had a major dispute. We've had things we've had to work through, but we've typically come to a consensus or close to a consensus on it. So that is one of the parts that, the Lord has been gracious to us so far, that we haven't had to deal with that. I think part of what we would do is, because, like I said, we have multiplied or broken into 2 fellowships now. So we have another team of elders that is there that we all get together every so often to just consult with each other. If there's anything big that's pressing for both church, the greater 2 churches together, we'll discuss. So I would imagine we would come before the larger group of elders, and that would probably be the first step, and just get input. And we don't have this codified, but I think it is helpful to have an odd number of elders.
Yes.
That way, if you have and maybe it's actually better to have an even number, but if you do have a dispute, you can have a tiebreaker. And not saying that you have to have a tiebreaker. I mean, sometimes gridlock is the right thing. I think that's part of the problem with our political system, is that some people think gridlock's bad. Sometimes gridlock is good. It prevents you from doing things that maybe you shouldn't do.
I agree.
So that would probably be the first step. Outside of that, like I said, we do have a number of other churches and older elders that we're friends with, that we're related with, that could help us in a time of crisis, I guess, or a time of if a major dispute came up. But I'll have to officially say a TBD on that, because we really haven't crossed that bridge yet.
And Lord willing, you never have to. Let's hope. But I do like that answer, that, there might not be an authoritative body over you per se, but you can still involve other mature, doctrinally sound believers in your area around you, other elders of other churches. So I still think that is a good answer. And like we said, hopefully this just never happens, but we do recognize humanity. We do like to argue a bit. But okay, so that's a great answer. Something else that comes to mind is, what about the, I guess, practical benefits of having a building? So, for example, if someone's getting married, it helps to have like a little chapel area. Or let's say teens want to get together for a party, a kickoff. I'm just thinking like fall kickoff, because we're heading into school real soon. Let's see what else. If they want to have a pizza party, lock-in, insert all the different youth activities. It just helps to have your own space for meetings and whatever, bigger events. But I know with at a home, that might be somewhat limited. Not everything will be off limits, but maybe larger type events. So just from a practical standpoint, having a building can be helpful. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, having a building there's a lot of advantages to it. I mean, for one thing, it's not in your house. So we host church a lot. So we've had our share of holes knocked in the walls by children running around, and your carpet gets dirty. I mean, there's all the kind of the invasion of your private space, your personal space that happens, which is, I mean, honestly, you just get over it. It's not a huge deal, but it can be a really big deal to some people, and it is like it's different. It's you're dealing with, you don't have a nursery per se. You don't necessarily have a great outdoor space for the kids to play in. When it's raining, people get muddy feet inside. I mean, so all the domestic annoyances, I guess. I mean, I look at it as just, it's a chance to die to self, to some of the more unimportant things anyways, spilled milk things in life.
Yes.
Lord will, thankfully, like, God is really kind of, I personally don't really think about it that much. But, I know some people, it's still, it's not fun to get your house all messy. But my sister, she made a good point. She, cause they host as well, that every time we have, church at their house, she says she feels like it's blessing her home, because you have, the church is in your home, just worshiping God together. So there's like a real blessing from that.
That's true.
But it's challenging though, when we want to have our joint services with our sister church. That's over 100 people, and it's hard to. We have like maybe one house that we can fit all 100 people in. So we do a lot of outdoor stuff. So as far as like finding spaces to do things, typically we'll try to aim for outdoor things. So if that's like a big gazebo or a canopy somewhere that we can borrow, we'll do stuff like that. which is good. I mean, again, it's weather permitting, so it's
Yeah.
You kind of, I don't know. It's one of those things. It's like everything that's obvious, those are the problems.
Yeah.
And we do certainly benefit from, like if somebody is getting married, like and a church is willing to let them use their facility, that's awesome. It's a great blessing. So I think it's one of those things that it shows that there is which I would, I think for like larger churches, especially churches with larger, large facilities, there's a big opportunity to really kind of minister to smaller fellowships that don't have the buildings and stuff like that. For those kind of special occasions like weddings, funerals, things of that nature. So I think there's definitely a place for having some kind of Christian facilities around that the church can use. I mean, I will say, it's like part of the problem, though, something that's been a little bit disappointing, maybe not super surprising, but churches are very, they can be tight-fisted in some ways about lending resources like that, which is a little disappointing. I understand it because like you don't necessarily want just anybody coming and preaching in your facility. Like you don't know what they believe, you don't know what they're going to do, so you have to have some sort of just oversight over what's happening with the resources you have been given. But it's a shame to see so many places just basically empty 95% of the time. That's been but that said, we've been doing this for 4 years, so we really haven't had an issue with this, kind of the stuff you're talking about. I mean, we don't really do like children's church kind of stuff because we don't have like another space in the house that would be ideal for doing like a children's church. So we do structure our services kind of understanding these limitations of partly facility limitations. So like we try to keep our services under an hour. And I mean, I grew up, we did like 2.5 hour long services. So I'm not opposed to the long haul by any stretch. But when you don't have a nursery and you got a bunch of kids and we have a lot of kids, it's like kids that have a very small attention span. And I think it was Amy Carmichael, she had adopted all those children in India. But I think in one of her writings, she talked about how they did church for about 20 minutes or so. And that was basically all the kids could take. So we do about, so our services usually look about 20 minutes of song, praise and worship, 20 minutes or so of a sermon, a teaching, and then 20 minutes of prayer and a communion. And so we end up with around an hour. The kids do great. If anybody's wondering, pretty much any size child outside of an infant can last for an hour without just losing their mind.
That's true. We think we constantly have to entertain, like tablet wise, screen wise, and that's not true. So I like several things that you said. One, it's an opportunity to die to self. That some of the things we think are a necessity, some of the things that we just have to have, and oh man, we can't worship Jesus without all the latest technology, fog machine, whatever, a nice fancy stage, massive screen behind the preacher, whatever it is, and like you have to have those, otherwise it's not church. Some of those things you recognize, like those are very first world Western Christian mindsets on stuff. Whereas if you mention Francis Chan, love him, and you mention, maybe there are some believers in other parts of the world that as long as there's a Bible and someone who is able to read that Bible, it could be on a dirt floor, they do not care, and the worship. And so I will recognize that there's the two sides to that coin. Yeah, having a building is nice from a practical standpoint for certain reasons, but also the moment you introduce a building, you also introduce a potential for spiritual stunting because people think you have to have a building, or idolatry, like, oh, look at our building. It's just so beautiful and nice and big. That can be another source of idolatry. And so you also you help in some areas, but there are also some problems that come with that. And so, yeah, I think as Christians in America, we are very spoiled. So I think you bring up some good points. You phrased it more nicely than I did, but I think you bring up some good points. The next one I'll bring up has to do with missionary work, giving to missions, sending out missionaries. And the thought is, for example, in the Southern Baptist Convention, the SBC, they have their different groups that are responsible for mission work, either international or here in the country. And in a denomination, you can potentially gather a whole bunch of money and you can support a whole bunch of missionaries. And maybe a bit more obviously than you can by a single home church or house church. So the thought is, with a denomination, you can do bigger things and send more people. What might be your thoughts there when it comes to mission work?
I guess, I mean, as you're saying that, I was just, it's like, money is not as fungible, right? So it's kind of doesn't matter how you move it around. It's like a dollar is a dollar. And so the way we give is like, so we pretty much, we do support missions. And thankfully, because we have no overhead, pretty much all of our giving is either to missions or it's directly to meet needs that are brought up before the church. So in that sense, it's relatively efficient. Now, we don't have like the big network, like the mission board or whatever, things like that are, have decades and decades of being worked out in these various places. But, the Lord he just brings people across your path too. So like today we have a couple that's going to, the husband is from Sweden and the wife's an old friend of ours, but grew up here, but they're moving to Sweden to plant a church. So it's like, that's a pretty, a niche kind of little small thing that you might not necessarily hear about. And then there may not be a big missions focus on Sweden from like your typical missionary board. So it's like the Lord just kind of, he brings the needs in front of you. And like, we support missionaries who do work in the Middle East. Again, people that we know. And I think that's a benefit to it, being this size, is it's typically, when we're given to a missionary, we know them or somebody knows them personally. Mm-hmm. And so there's a little bit of, hopefully a little bit of built-in accountability with that. Anyways, it can be challenging, just the actual figuring out how to send money around. That piece is, maybe the least practical or most, practically inefficient part about it, is just literally how to transfer money around without it being, just incorrectly handled. So that's a challenge. That's something we're actually still working on, how to best handle, essentially, cutting checks to people and things like that.
Yeah.
Because for a while we operated without being a state's recognized church, like for tax reasons. And part of that was, we didn't know how to set it up. It's the first time we've done this. And part of it was, there's just like I have like a slight objection to the state having anything to do with what I do for church or not.
Yes, understood.
I don't understand why the state has to be in the business of recognizing if you're a church or not, but you kind of have to for handling money, because you can't just have everybody send a bunch of money to like me, because then I'll have to report that on my taxes as income. So it ends up, the way the system is, you really should set up a church account. Mm-hmm. Or it's not super, super complicated, but it's just annoying.
Another step.
Yeah, it's just the government's involved with it, which is like, whatever.
Understood.
I would say it's like, and what kind of pushed me over the edge of that not being a real problem is like, well, if we ever have to go back to not being like officially a church recognized by the state, for tax reasons, we can always do that. That's not that hard. You basically just stop.
Yes.
Just start doing it. There's no rules for that. So that's good. But yeah, so like getting the money out, that's probably the biggest challenge, I think. But otherwise it's pretty efficient. Like we don't have, like, if I give to a missionary who's working in like Lebanon, it's like, I know it's going to them, and it's like, insofar as I trust, who I'm giving it to, I know that that's what's happening with it.
Mm-hmm.
So versus if I give to just necessarily like a board, like I don't necessarily know what they're doing with it. I don't tend to think they're wasting money, but
inefficient.
It's possible. I mean, I don't know.
And so I think you bring up several good points there, that you send your money away to some third party. You're not sure. You imagine some of it's going to get to a missionary, but you also don't know. You don't know how much is being paid for salaries, overhead, all those things, to where if you give a dollar bill, you don't know how much of that dollar is actually going to make it to its destination. So I agree with those things. So you might concede with, the overall amount of money a denomination can give a lot, because a lot of churches are together. But your strength with a home church is, going back to other things we've talked about, relationships. You know people, you know where the money's going. There are fewer hoops to jump through. You can give directly. And so you have a lot of strengths through a house church that a denomination doesn't have. It's slower, inefficient, all these things we're talking about. So it's kind of a give and take with that. So good points there, John. And okay, so I'm going to bring up one final objection people might have, and it has to do with maybe leadership, credentials, training. So for example, I went to Beeson Divinity School, part of Sanford University. So at the end, you get this, the whole piece of paper that says you have these credits, these classes, stamp of approval, you have this degree. And it's not perfect. It's far from a perfect system. A lot of money. People can jump through hoops and they don't learn anything. They're still immature spiritually. Sure, I understand. Still flaws with it. But at the very least, you can say to some degree, you learn theology, you learn doctrine, church history. For example, you, like I am, you're a William Lane Craig fan. So, for instance, there's philosophy, theology, apologetics. To some degree, you're exposed to something. You have to be, because you passed some classes. So then you go and you take that piece of paper, you apply to churches, and you hope you find someone good when you're hiring. And, they have a useful degree, they learn something, and then they become your pastor, your elder, whatever. That is a process that happens. But with a home church, training, raising people, maybe getting more broadly exposed to academic stuff, it seems like that process of having a church leader, training them, education, all that stuff, the steps are a little more unclear. Finn right now is behind the computer and he's about to jump on, so hold on. All right, this is Finn. Say hi, Finn. You are on the channel now. For those listening on the podcast, my cat Finn just hopped in and he gets a little noisy, so forgive me. But anyways, and so I think you get where I'm going. The whole denominational seminary, there are some pros to that, some strengths to it. But also I know there are some weaknesses. When it comes to house churches and home churches, raising leaders, implementing leaders, hiring leaders, what does that look like for y'all?
Yeah, I certainly think there's a big place in the body of Christ for formal education. I think people like Dr. Craig are invaluable assets to us as Christians. I've personally gained a ton for my faith from the work that these scholars have done. And I hope the church always has a place and emphasis and is able to fund. That's another good example of don't muzzle the ox while it treads out the grain. You can't do the kind of work that a Dr. Craig does full time or without being full time. You have to be full time. Yes. So there's certainly a place for that kind of work. And so that said, though, it's the disciples were not, highly educated men. They had a baseline level of education from just their Hebrew school, and they understood the Old Testament scriptures to a certain degree, but their main teacher was Jesus, and then when Jesus was ascended, it was the Holy Spirit. So I think as far as Christian education within the church, the emphasis should always be on just discipleship in the simplest terms of you're being taught to follow Jesus. You're taught the words of Jesus. You're taught what the scriptures say, and you're taught to listen to the Holy Spirit. And I think that really is when it talks about able to teach as a requirement for an elder, that's the heart that it's coming from, is that you are speaking almost like Moses was speaking. You know, he wasn't speaking because of his education. He was speaking through what the Lord gave him. And I would hope that our leadership in all the churches is educated, yes, but Holy Spirit led, that they let the Holy Spirit speak through them. So I think that it's like, as Christians, we need to be like Bereans. We need to search the scriptures. We need to see what the word says so that we're not deceived. And at the same time, we can't depend upon our just rote knowledge to save us, because, I mean, look at, like Harvard and Yale were originally seminaries. These places of learning that have been lost to the church. And so there's certainly a place for both. But I think at the end of the day, the Lord's going to be he's not going to be so much interested in what type of knowledge we had about, preterism or paedobaptism or whatever your isms and your niche little Christian theology things you want to talk about. He's really going to be interested in your relationship with the Holy Spirit and with Jesus Christ. Like, what did you do when the Spirit was leading you? Did you ignore the Spirit? Mm-hmm. Did you walk in the Spirit? And do you have the fruit of the Spirit in your life? And that stuff is going to be very powerful, I think, at the end of the day. And it's like, for people out there that are being led down a scholarly path, it's like, do it as unto the Lord. Like, it's valuable in as much as it is unto the Lord. So if you're being led down that path, do it. But if regardless, like this common denominator between all of these non-scholarly and scholarly paths is that the Lord is leading you, that the Spirit is leading you. So go down that way. That I think is, I think that's what when you look at the requirements for leadership and eldership in particular, that's what it is. Now, practically speaking, if somebody has a Bible college degree or seminary degree, you at least know they have studied something.
Yeah.
But at the same time, what I would suggest for house churches and things like this is that the people in the congregation, you get to know each other, and you can tell who's in the Word. You can tell who's praying, and the Lord will reveal that. And they may be just a fisherman, but the Lord may be speaking to them and teaching them, and they may be studious.
Yes.
And so I think it's a pretty big tent that the Lord can use as far as church leadership. But obviously, you got to go look at the passages that teach explicitly the qualifications of an elder and go by that.
Yeah, I love that answer. So yeah, seminary and academia has its place. And you mentioned William Lane Craig. We love him. He's great. And so it has its place, but you focused on something that I think the local church, house church or not, needs to zero in on, which is discipleship. Know your people. Train one another, walk together, live together. And so even in the absence of a degree or whatever the traditional credential is, or ordination, in the absence of that, someone can still be a good leader because you've lived life with them. You've seen them grow up. You've seen how they've handled trials and tribulations and the way they maybe have led Bible studies or they've done a devotional. You can see some of those things. And so even without the traditional certification process, whatever that looks like for a denomination, a house church can still train up leaders who are mature in the faith, knowledgeable in the word, and really the resources available to us online when it comes to classes and all the different topics, philosophy, theology, apologetics, church history, all of it. It's all there online as well. So again, we have information at our fingertips like never before. And so, Yes, I still think that's still not a defeater of the home church idea. You just, as we always should, you emphasize relationships and truly getting to know someone. And then you'll know off of First Timothy and Titus, hey, does this person qualify as an elder or a deacon? So again, good answer there, John. I appreciate that. So that really was all of the objections I wanted to bring up. I do have a note on virtual church. I want to ask, is virtual church real? Can you have real church that way? We'll get there. But before I do that, pros, cons of home church or house church. Did we cover the bases? Anything else we may have missed? Anything else you'd like to say about a home church?
We talked about a lot of the main stuff that people would be curious about, but I guess I would also add that, like, the way we do our services in particular, just like the actual steps of our services are based off Acts 2:42. But that's not but we set up chairs in our living room, like we set them up in rows, so it's, that's just the way it literally looks. Mm-hmm. So if anybody out there is just interested at all in what home church is, it's like, you don't have to have a closed mind view of it. It can be everybody sitting in a circle together. It can be 2 or 3 people. There's going to be places in this world, in this country, that there's maybe only 3 believers in like an apartment building or something like that. You can have church whatever size it takes. Obviously it's, good you don't forsake meeting together. But the way we do it, the way it just looks on a Sunday is not the only way it can look. And it's not the only way that's God pleasing. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. You have to walk in humility, because there's a temptation of small churches and house churches, like anything that's small that seems like a select group of people, to get haughty, be prideful, be like, well, we understand it. We get it. We know what we're talking about. And that is not from the Lord. That is not what the Lord is saying. Like, the Lord is not interested in you being better than everybody else. He's interested in your heart, and he's interested in other people, and he wants to see his church grow. So let Jesus build his church however he needs to build it. Mm. And if that involves, it's like we have men who lead the church, but if you're in an area where it's only ladies that are believers, that are faithful believers, then by all means, God will use you. God will still use you in a place like that. I think it's like we just need to let the Lord work. And there might be an ideal way to do things, but it's his church. He's going to build it how he wants to build it. So don't force him you can't force him to do anything anyways. Mm-hmm. But it's like, don't just thrust your own ideas at the forefront, like let Jesus lead. So I don't know. That's
no, that's true.
How helpful that is, but it
is helpful, because no matter what church model you're a part of, we all have this tendency to think that we figured out the formula, we got it right. And so there's an elitism that comes with that. And so I agree that I love the way y'all do things. And there are pros and cons that we've talked about, but also like how you're not dogmatically asserting that this is not just the best way, it's the only way, or not just a better way, it's the best way. We are trying to be faithful to Scripture, and you can come to different conclusions there. We are trying to be faithful to our calling in Christ. So I like the way you're phrasing things. Now, all right, John, before we head off, I have a question about virtual church. All right, people joining a live stream, people. Now I do know there are medical reasons. So, for example, some people they can't travel. I know some people, they might be injured, ill for a season, and they just can't move. So, barring those reasons where you cannot move from your house or move from your bed, what do you think about people just joining live streams and they hear the sermon that way, and they're broadly aware of what a local church is doing because of the service they watch, And that is their primary way of, if you're on the podcast, you can't see the air quotes I'm using. Their primary way of attending church is virtual, and they're healthy physically. They're able to go. They're just choosing to join a live stream. What are your thoughts on that? Is that church?
Well, I think, first of all, I benefit tremendously from recorded sermons and teachings and things like that. Like that is, like you mentioned earlier, that is a huge benefit and blessing of the modern day, like really the last 15, 20 years. I mean, I remember my dad walking around with a bunch of cassette tapes from sermons and stuff. And what we have is so much more convenient than that. And 30 years before my dad had the cassette tapes, they didn't have anything really.
Yeah.
So we have just a tremendous blessing of knowledge and that we have available at our fingertips. So in that sense, I think recorded sermons and teachings are great. Now, to your question, though, about the otherwise able-bodied person who's just not coming for what reason, and I would just ask that person, like, what is your reason? You know, if you're not limited by health or time, you know, like if you don't have a shift work or something like that is just preventing you from coming, like why? Like we have explicit passages that talk about, again, not forsaking gathering together, meeting together. There's a benefit of being around people, but it's also, we're human beings. Like we need to be around each other to know each other. There's something about bodily being in the same presence as somebody else that is important. It's not the resurrection from the dead is not a bunch of ghosts coming up. We're bodily raised from the grave. So God did not design us to be alone. I mean, he explicitly said it's not good for man to be alone. So if you're alone by choice, it's like you need to really go before God and ask, like, why am I doing this? Is this just because I am inconvenienced? Maybe is it just because I don't like the people I'm around, or I don't know. Like you have your reasons, and if it's not a good reason, and you have to be honest with yourself, then stop. You need to go. And if the church is too far away, find something that's closer. Like whatever the objection is, really think about it. And I guarantee God is going to make a way for it to be. But like you said, I think it's like, for the invalids, people that are unable to come, during COVID when people were not allowed to meet together, at least we had virtual options. Like I said, for us, we didn't really miss a beat. We met in person anyways. But had it been like the Black Death or something, like 20% of everybody was actually dying, we probably would have, I don't know what we would have done. We probably would have, I don't know what we would have done. That's a hypothetical. But
yeah, let's hope we never have to figure that one out.
But at least now we have the option, like, okay, well, we still can meet together.
That's true.
So I don't want to like throw the baby out with the bathwater, but I feel like your question in particular is geared towards the people that are really they're just not interested in going.
They just do it because it's convenient.
They feel like they're supposed to do it, and they want to say they go to church somewhere. And it's like, you got to be honest with yourself. Are you really a member of this church? If you never know, if you were to show up, would anybody know you?
Yeah.
And that's a tough thing. And as a leader, do you have people that you've never met, like, that you've literally never been in the same room with them, that you can honestly say, these are people that are part of the flock that I'm supposed to watch over? You wouldn't even be able to pick them out of the line in front of you at McDonald's. So I don't know. It's not good for men to be alone. I would, if you have the time, or I mean, if you're physically able to, and if your work situation permits it, which if your work situation doesn't permit it, I mean, it's a different topic, but you need to have some sort of Sabbath rest in your life. So you need to, maybe you can figure out something there, but it'd have to be a very good reason to meeting people there. So anyways, yeah. So I'm generally speaking, I'm against virtual church membership, like you were describing.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's almost like for those who are doing it out of convenience as opposed to necessity. It's like potato chip church. It can, it helps a little bit and it can be used here and there, but it's not really substantive. It's not substantial. It's not fulfilling. It's not enriching or any of that. It's just like, it's something, but not really what you're looking for to aid to help you spiritually. So I think you phrased that pretty well. But
and it's not just how much you're helped. It's like you have no opportunity to serve other people.
Great point.
You may be, so you may be sitting maybe you sit in the back row at church, whatever, and somebody walks up, sits next to you, and you know them because you've been going to church with them. You know something's wrong. You can ask them what's wrong, and they'll tell you, and you pray for them. But if you never saw the person, the cameras don't typically face out in the congregation. The live stream stops when it stops. You're just cut off. It's a form of isolation that is unhelpful, unfruitful for yourself and for other people, I think. So,
great point. Yeah, it's not just for you. You can't bless other people. And you think about the gifts of the Spirit as you're talking about. They were made to be part of one body. If you are a finger, an eyeball, whatever, a foot, and you isolate yourself from the rest of the body, there are so many people that you're not able to bless and serve and just share the love of Christ with because you're off somewhere else and you're completely detached. So great point, John. So I appreciate you coming on to the podcast and eventually the YouTube channel when I get to that. And I appreciate that. This has been John Hobbs joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Thank you for doing this.
Yeah, anytime. It's fun.
All right, y'all. Dangerous Faith Podcast and YouTube channel. We'll have more for you as the weeks go by. Y'all have a great day. God bless.